Well, I think music plays a really big part in bringing communities together. I think songs that address issues of social justice, cultural acknowledgement, difference between people, different points of view, different perspectives, all these kind of things are in music.
Rose Bygrave, welcome to the Australian Music Vault.
Oh, it's a lovely thing to be asked to be part of this Australian Music Vault because, as you get older, it's really lovely to be remembered. I grew up very in touch with the land. I loved growing up in the country. A small farming community. I suppose it was a booming town during the baby boom era. My mum and dad had a farm, and so I think there's a set of skills that you learn growing up as a kid in the country that you don't really learn anywhere else. So very fortunate, and Wallora's a great little town too. Beautiful community, and I think when you grow up in a small community, you learn about the value of community as well. My interest in music really began when I was very young because I had two grandmothers who both played piano very well. A grandfather who sang beautifully. My dad played violin, my mum learnt piano. So I kind of came out of a musical household where it really wasn't considered anything terribly special to have music in the family. But in terms of Australian music, I think probably I went away to school, and in that period I was playing a lot. I was playing a lot with friends and we were talking about music a lot. And, I'd been playing since I was about 4. I'd sort of discovered the joy of music when I was about 4. So then into school, and then I think probably, went through various genres of music before I really came to Australian music. Of course, everyone was listening to, the Little River Band, and I think one of my first experiences was hearing country radio play at one of the Ballarat civic centres or something like that, and that was that great band with Kieran Tolhurst and those sort of things. So I sort of learnt that it was possible to actually to get out and play something that was uniquely Australian. I think it has to do with, it's a connection to place for a start. So often the lyrics will use a colloquialism or something kind of unique to Australia. Of course, the sound of the voices is sort of unique too, especially with the bands that stayed away from the American accent, which was pretty common too because, we had so much American music flooding into Australia. But when I heard Kieran's band play, it was a combination of instruments too. I think there was, mandolin and guitar and drums. It was a softer vibe than, say, West Coast American music. Yeah, there's something unique about Australian music because I think it comes out of a sense of a relaxed sense about where we live, how we live, who we are. Perhaps, we're so far away from, major events in the world that, maybe that's what creates a kind of relaxed feeling. We can talk about what we want to talk about. There's no fear of censorship and those kind of things. But also, too, when I was growing up, I also listened a lot to, I went through all sorts of periods. I went through a jazz, avant-garde jazz period where I was listening to, artists like Frank Zappa and Keith Jarrett, and then I went through another one. I lived in a house with a guy who was mad on bluegrass, so I listened to a lot of bluegrass music. So there was, the Country Gentlemen, Gene Clark and people like that. So when I finally got to, and then with Joe Geyer and Wendy Saddington, I played with her for a while. So by the time I came to listening properly to Australian music, I also had all these other genres going on in my head as well. So you could sort of see, how Australian music came to be what it was. It was a combination of all sorts of things. Some bands went on a slightly jazz direction. Some took more of an American country or, some hints of bluegrass. Of course, everyone was listening to Bob Dylan, and anyone who was writing songs especially was listening to people like him and Joni Mitchell. And so there was this huge melting pot. We were sort of lucky, really, because there was a huge melting pot of music coming into Australia. And I think Australian music kind of came out of that too. People found their own niche in amongst that somewhere. And I think that's part of the reason that it became unique. I started playing music when I was at art school. I went to art school for 4 years, and during that time I got a gig playing music in a restaurant. And the restaurant, it was funny because I really didn't know any songs. So I thought, I really want to get out and play. I've got to do this, I've got to see if I can do it. So out I went, and what I used to do at this restaurant was just sort of waffle around on the keyboards. I'd make up the occasional melody and then I'd sort of fill in that for a while and really look what I was, look like I knew what I was doing. And occasionally people used to come up and say, could you play something from, I'll say Bob Dylan, just for the sake of saying someone. But I'd say, the only one I really know is one that he never really recorded, but I just happened to get hold of this tape and this is it. So I'd just be waffling away on the keyboard and they'd go, oh, wow, I've never heard that before. So it was how to fake it and get away with it. So after that, I moved down to Point Lonsdale and played, and we formed a band down there called the Salty Dogs. And that was a mix of reggae, bluegrass, soul, rock, country. So it was all kinds of crazy instruments, trumpet, banjo. I think I was playing guitar in that particular lineup, so God knows how I got away with that. But anyway, I was playing guitar. And quite a few of those musicians went on to play in other bands as well. Jeff Raglis, who's a great artist as well, did a lot of work with Mambo. He was the trumpet player and he went on to work with the Bachelors of Prague. And people sort of went into these, what's another band, The Nicest People. So I think it was 1979 when I first heard that Goanna was looking for a piano player because the guitarist had left the band. And I think at that point it had been a 4-piece band with Shane Howard, Mike Biskin, Rod Ho and Carl Smith, so 4 people, and the guitarist left, which left an enormous gap in the band. So someone had heard me play in the Salty Dogs and they said, you should go and try out for Goanna. So I remember going along to what was supposed to be a kind of audition and someone had to carry a piano up three flights of stairs. Someone else had cut themselves on a bottle and after about 10 minutes, I think we played one song or something, and after about 10 minutes they said, yeah, okay, you're great, you're in. So that was it. It was no big deal, and we rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed in an old derelict garage down in Warn Ponds, and Shane was playing a kind of a unique group of songs too. He was playing some Jackson Browne songs, and he was playing Little Feat, songs from Little Feat, Keeping Up with the Joneses, and they were bands that I really liked as well. So I sort of thought, well, this is really good. Shane was great out the front. He had a presence about him, very committed, very intense, and I could tell there that there was a fantastic talent, and it was just great to then sort of launch into the process. Marcia Howard, Shane's sister, joined later. She joined, I think, after about 4 years. We did a lot of playing up and down the coast, board riders, dues, friends' 21st birthdays, and then backwards and forwards to Melbourne a lot, where we were building an audience really. All the places like the Prospect Hill and all the venues in Melbourne, of which there used to be a large number. You could play, we used to do 3 gigs a night. Sometimes you'd go from A to B and finish, the last gig would start at 3 a.m. at Bananas. And so we got a tour support with James Taylor. And at that point, Mars joined. So, and because Mars was 16 when I met her. She was just a kid, really. Shane and I are 6 years older than Marcia. So, and she was great. She had that youthful energy. She was a really, really good singer at that stage. She loved to dance. She was just brought a lovely fresh energy to the band as well. So off we went on a James Taylor support, and we went all around Australia. And I think the first time my parents had ever heard me sing was at Festival Hall in Adelaide, and which is I think I did the opening song. It was one of the Beatles songs, and so I opened, and then the rest of the band came on, and Mum and Dad were there, and I said, "Oh, you're in Adelaide, you should just come along to the concert. We're playing tonight." So I think they were pretty nervous as to what they'd get to hear, but they heard me for the first time, so that was wonderful. We'd done a small EP early on, but then after the James Taylor tour, we had a lot of interest from record companies, and we'd also built up quite a big following in Melbourne too. We were packing places at that point. And so the WEA came along to the gig, and we ended up signing with them. So, and that was, that then took us into the studio where we recorded Spirit of Place and Solid Rock, and but we'd been playing we'd been playing a lot of the songs for quite a long time, so it wasn't as if we had to go in and actually write an album. So that first album, had been a very worked bunch of songs. We won 3 awards. I guess now they were the Countdown Awards, which I suppose is today's equivalent of an ARIA, of the ARIAs. So we won, I think, Best New Band, Best Album and Best Single. So 3 awards. We were playing with a lovely man playing didgeridoo for us, Kumanjai Jabadunga, who was a Warlpiri man, and he'd dress in full ceremonial dress and come on stage and play didge with us. And at the awards, he accepted the award for Best Album, and I remember him saying, "It's great to see all you white fellas here at the awards." So it marked a fairly big turning point, really, in that Solid Rock the album Spirit of Place marked a fairly big turning point, I think, in Australian music. Shane was the main songwriter and he wrote Solid Rock. And I think that song gave us access into Aboriginal culture. So at the same time as giving us access, we also had to, I think, convince Aboriginal people too that our motives were in the right place. I think, a lot of people came to the shows to actually interrogate what we were doing. Are you just ripping off culture? Are you, are you taking this seriously? Is this just a commercial venture? But I think Shane's motivation for writing that song came out of a trip to Uluru and a very profound experience out there, and a very passionate song came out of that experience. So, I mean, we knew when we first heard the song. I remember sitting in my lounge room in Swan Bay and he played the song to me and I thought, yeah, that's a great song. That's really saying something that hasn't been said before. It needs to be said, and this is a great opportunity to actually draw attention to all sorts of issues for Aboriginal people in Australia, land rights, all sorts of stuff. The lyrics in the song say, somewhere someone lied. So it was time to kind of set the story straight. Politically in Australia at that time when Solid Rock was released, it was also a time of change. Paul Keating was coming into power. It was the whole Gough Whitlam Governor-General debacle of, being sacked by the Governor-General. And Aboriginal people, Indigenous people were the forgotten people of their own country, really. And so the more we got out and about and went round to communities, the more we were invited into, people's homes and people's campsites, and we were taken to places that, a lot of people wouldn't go. The more we got to know what the issues were that were facing Indigenous people, and we made great friends then too. And so the friends, you don't like to see your friends suffering and experiencing hardship. So, it was just a huge eye-opener for me. And, Australian history at that point hadn't, we'd been taught about British history, and early Australian history somehow left out the Indigenous component of. And so this was an eye-opener. It allowed us to appreciate the plight of people, the forgotten people. We made friends. We got to work with great Indigenous players, Bart Willoughby, Coloured Stone. We met great activists and poets, Lionel Fogarty and his wife Cheryl Buchanan, Bobby Sykes, and we were invited to big rallies everywhere around Australia too. The big anti-mining rally over in Western Australia, where an old Indigenous man got up and he said, when they first came here, we were promised that King George would come and meet us because they said that, we're taking this land for King George. And he said, we're still waiting for King George to come, and this is well after, of course, King George had died, but there was still that expectation that there might be some justice out there. So to be able to go all around the country many times and sing Solid Rock was a great opportunity to actually share some history with Australian pop culture. And the song was so strong, you know, it had such a great rock beat, and I think a lot of people thought, oh, great song, you know, but then they heard the lyrics of it and thought, no, this is making a serious statement. And the ABC wouldn't play it because they thought it was politically too controversial, that it, for whatever reason, it went against their mandate for the type of music that they would play. But then when everybody, all the rest of the radio stations added it, they kind of had no choice but to add it, which was great. Also, you know, touring, that was a point where Aboriginal people weren't really allowed into, or in some places, they weren't really allowed into pubs and clubs. You know, they were turned away from the door, really. So it was great because we had, you know, number one single for many weeks, and we had packed houses all around Australia. It was a great opportunity for us to say, look, you know, we're playing here and they're coming in. New South Wales, Queensland, I think that was the Joe Bielke era up there. And it wasn't all places, but in some places, you know, there was a really bad attitude towards who came into the pubs and clubs, really. Leagues, clubs, those kind of places. The song Solid Rock, they loved it. But as I said, you know, they were also very wary because they weren't sure, you know, what our motivations were. So we had to prove our motivations. We knew that we were full of goodwill. But, you know, it's when you look at things from the other side of the fence, you know, you can understand that it was the first time that didgeridoo had been played in a commercial way. So radio, it was played all over the radio, and that was a pretty big experience for a lot of people. You know, they hadn't ever heard a didgeridoo. Now it's commonplace. You know, every second person at a folk festival can play a didgeridoo, but then it was totally and absolutely unique. And we also had, you know, an Aboriginal person come, depending on where we were. Someone would get up and play didge with us wherever we were. Sometimes we toured with a particular person like Bart Willoughby or Bobby Jabonunga. I think we might have met Bart Willoughby in Sydney. He was playing with a band called No Fixed Address, and he's such a great guy, Bart. He's such, you know, I treasure Bart. We sort of grew up through the music industry together, really. And Bart's such a lovely spirit, and he is a great musician, and he'll try anything. And a couple of years ago, Marcia and I went out and did a tour with Bart, and Bart was playing the grand organ. So there's only a few grand organs around Australia, and he didn't know how to play one, but he took lessons. And there was Bart sitting up like something like Phantom in the Opera in the Melbourne Town Hall with a great, fantastic Aboriginal flag cape. He came out like a, you know, cape and played the grand organ. And so we toured, you know, we did Tassie and a few other country places around Victoria. I think Bendigo was another place that had one. I was with Goanna for about 10 years. Yeah, 10 very full-on years. The change from being sort of just, you know, country musicians into number one selling band was kind of gradual, really, and we spent so much of the time working, like putting up posters and running here and running there and trying to promote and going to and from shows, and that when the fame actually hit, apart from signing a lot of autographs and doing a lot of press and doing a lot of shows, life just continued on. We weren't an indulgent band in that sense. We were very kind of earthed, cup of tea in the band room kind of people. There was none of the fantasy of rock and roll. There was none of the hard drinking kind of stuff that goes on that people fantasise about. It was just work, and it was a job. It was a great job, but we had to treat it like a job too, basically to stay safe on the road because we were touring so much. Occasionally we'd get home, throw our bags in the passage for, 2 days, and then we'd be off again. So I think 11 months straight was the most we toured in a year. When I joined Goanna, there was really only a few women performing on the road. There was a few people singing backing vocals. Richard Clapton had a great backing singer. The Eurogliders had the two, women musicians. And then there was us. And, of course, people like Renee Geyer and stuff like that who were just fantastic. But in terms of being a musician on the road, it was challenging because it was so male-dominated. And, it wasn't unheard of for guys to say, look, could you just play more like a man? So... So, that lead break needs to be more like a man would play it. And it's kind of like, well, sorry, but I ain't a man. And more thrust or something. I'm not really sure, but that's how I've come to interpret it anyway. I mean, these days, there's women musicians everywhere, and that's fantastic. But in those days, there just wasn't. And we'd run into, on the road, everyone was touring, and you'd often pull up at some roadhouse in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night, and there'd be 2 or 3 other bands there, eating after gigs, going between Sydney or Canberra or Sydney or Brisbane or somewhere, on the road. You'd always run into musicians and road crews and stuff, and they were all male road crews. I don't think I ever came across a female roadie. There are these days, which is great, but women just weren't there. It was just all set up for men, really. We often, we just had to kind of muck in, really. And I loved working with the guys. I loved them. I loved our road crew. They were fantastic people. I worked like dogs, to make us sound great every night on stage, to set us up and pull us down and then drive all night, really, just like that Jackson Browne song. So it was challenging. A lot of the time it was challenging. Yep. On the road, it was great to have Marcia there for me because we could always retreat to our room. We always shared a room. They always sat us next to each other on the plane, on the train, on the bus, on the automobile, on the boat. We always seemed to be together, and we became like sisters, really. We looked out for each other. We heard each other's, intimate details of each other's lives, every day. For months and months and months, we were each other's sounding boards, we were each other's mirror. So being on the road is very intense. It's like, it only takes one person in a band to be off kilter or not quite fit in, and it's just like that rotten apple syndrome. Just takes one to be negative or complaining or whatever. So, it was really kind of important for people to just bite their lip and get on with the job, really. Save the complaints for later and be professional. You know, it was very, very intense relationships. You're travelling with people, you're sort of half sleeping with them all the time, you're grumpy, you're tired. You know, it's intense and good, but intense. I think we just sort of got to a point we really needed a break because of that intensity. We got to a point, Shane was exhausted. We went to do a show in Sydney and he just didn't show up. And it had happened maybe once or twice before. You know, he felt the burden of carrying that band, I'm sure, all the time. So when it happened in Sydney that time, we just decided that, you know, we were going to go home. And so we went home. We had to do a lot of work, back work, to tidy up our affairs and stuff. And then we just sort of dispersed. You know, Shane and Marcia and I have remained very good friends over the years. You know, some people went off to play in other bands. So I first met Wendy Saddington through a friend, and they were putting together a bit of a band because Wendy's sort of musical performances had come and gone many times, and I think this was just another kind of incarnation of what she was doing, and they were looking for a keyboard player. So I went along and joined the band, and it was a kind of crazy mix of reggae, soul, blues, just kind of this mad mix of stuff, but really interesting. This is after Goanna stopped touring. So Wendy was a very quiet, very private person. She didn't have any ego until she opened her mouth, and then this great blues, soul kind of voice came out. She was amazing. You know, I don't think I had one conversation with her the whole time I worked with her, but it was just a really interesting experience to actually sit behind one of these great singers. And she was a really true blues singer. I think it really came from her essence. You know, she wasn't imitating anybody. She wasn't trying to be different. It was just the inner Wendy kind of coming out. So very, very wild experience. I went off to make another album, to make a solo album, which was fraught due to a clash with management and record companies. I had to deal with Polygram, and it just wasn't going well. Musically, it was going great. I was working with the lovely Sam C, who was part of Stockley C and Mason, and he'd been a musical director of the Vizard show and all sorts of stuff. And Sam and I were really good friends. And so he took me through the musical process of making a solo album. But somewhere in the midst of the finances got out of hand through no fault of our own, but that's another story. And so at that point, I didn't finish the album. I just said, look, that's it. I got to stop. I'm going to stop for a while. So I went and worked as a chef for a while, not trained, but a cook, I should say, and just kind of regrouped for a couple of years, and then started playing at the Hotel Como, and then upstairs was Channel 10, and their musical director heard me playing one day and wondered if I'd come and do the Bert Show. So Dear Bert had me on the show a lot of times, and then after that I kind of felt like I'd learnt enough to go and start again, which I did. I go and did some demos, and while I was demoing, I met Deb Byrne, who is making a record, and she said, oh, you know, why don't you come out on tour with me? So I played keyboards and sang with her, and she just finished a really lovely country album. So I went out with Deb for on and off for about a year, and that was lovely. Met a whole new set of musicians and played a whole different sort of music, and yeah, it was wonderful, and that kind of got me to a point where I really wanted to go out and do a CD. So that was the launch point for that for me. During the 90s, I was spending quite a bit of time at AAV, the recording studio over in South Melbourne, and it came to my attention that Mushroom were taking a band called Yothu Yindi into the studio. And someone rang me up from Mushroom and said, look, we're not sure how this is going to go, but would you mind helping Yothu Yindi with their vocals? And I thought, oh, crikey. And I suppose because they thought, you know, I'd had quite a bit of interaction with Indigenous people that I may be some sort of translator or something. I wasn't quite sure what the motivation was. But anyway, I said yes. And so both the Dr. Unipingus came round to my place and we had a play, and I said, look, I'm not really sure what's happening here, but I'll come into the studio with you if you like, and we'll work through the vocals and stuff. So as they're recording, I'd go in and, you know, I'd sort of help make suggestions and stuff like that. And they were lovely. They were lovely people, and so excited to be in the studio. And, you know, I sang on Treaty with, I think it was Tim Finn and might have been Paul Kelly and Tim Finn, yeah. So we devised that chorus, you know, the oh, that kind of line in the thing, and that was a great experience. Then all of a sudden, you know, the song is a hit, and you can tell when you hear a song like that it's going to be great. So that was terrific. I never did any touring with them or anything like that, but it was a great experience in the studio. I loved working with them, and they were terrific men and great talents, you know. Yeah, they both passed away, and it's a great loss. Yeah. Well, I think music plays a really big part in bringing communities together. I think songs that address issues of social justice, cultural acknowledgement, difference between people, different points of view, different perspectives, all these kind of things are in music. And so the songwriter's job, I think, is to actually articulate what is the voice of the times, really. And I know that's what I try and do as a songwriter. You take things from here, you take things from news and from community and from friends and family, and you pull things from all over the place, you know, and I think that in itself actually, you know, creates that voice then. And then if songs are kind of, even if they're not terribly successful, you know, you can sing to a room full of people about a subject, and you'll see people sitting around the room going, oh yeah, or I didn't know that, or yeah, that really moved me, or that thing. And people take those experiences away, and with any luck they think about them. Solid Rock was one of those songs where people would engage with us all the time about, you know, the subject matter of the song, really. And the amount of positive energy out there for change was remarkable. And so it didn't matter wherever we went, wherever we went, there was always people who would come forward and say, oh, it's about time we heard that story, or, you know, isn't it great to hear Aboriginal music? I never knew that these Indigenous bands existed, and isn't Bart Willoughby fantastic? And, you know, aren't the Coloured Stone Guys great? And all the other people we had with us. And I just don't think white Australia had much to do with Indigenous people. And so, you know, it was just an opportunity to see that really there's no difference between us. And a lot of the fear and suspicion you could see dissipate in a crowd, you know, when it was a mixed crowd, you know. And it was great to be part of that, because you could actually feel the change happening. You could actually, you know, sense it, and it was very moving. And looking back on that time, I think it was a really important catalyst. Live Aid was an amazing event. I remember it was all pulled together really quickly. You know, bands put their hands up all over the place, all the Australian bands. My memory of it was we performed at the Hordern Pavilion, I'm pretty sure. There were heaps of bands. There were all the major bands in Australia then. We wrote a song for the event and put it out as a single, I think, the sales went to the relief as well. And it was just a buzz. I mean, it's always great for musicians because none of us have usually got a lot of money, so it's always great to be able to turn your talent and music to a cause that actually can make a change, make a difference. And it was a terrible time, you know, that people were starving, and you know, it was an opportunity for Australia to actually, you know, have a big input. So it was great to be part of as well. I've made 5 CDs since then. I've had a solo career that's taken me through all the festivals in Australia. I played in India and Japan, and I'm currently working on another album now, which is great. It's just a quiet life as a musician I have now. There's not much fame involved in what I do now, but I love it. I love the artistry of making music, and that's what I'll be doing for the rest of my life.